One is the idea of contagion. Whether it has anything to do with this accident last night and the killing of these people.
You're going to see people try and politicize it and make it be about quote-unquote bail reform, which is a complete non-issue.
Now, when the truth about this Waukesha attack didn't align with their predetermined narrative, well, the media simply stopped talking about it. And when they do, as CNN did yesterday, this was their framing. Waukesha will hold a moment of silence today, marking 1 week since a car drove through a city Christmas parade. 6 people were murdered. Children are still in critical condition. But the media are past it. No investigation into Darrell Brooks's background, motives, racist views, none of it. So why are they doing this? Well, it doesn't fit their narrative. Let's count the ways. 1, the race of the alleged attacker, he was black. 2, the race of the victims were white. 3, the suspect was a BLM fanboy with anti-white views. 4, the victims were participating in a Christmas parade, which is a holiday the left hates. And 5, a Soros-funded DA let this serial criminal out of jail on a $1,000 bond 2 days prior to the attack. The inconvenient truth here is that this is an act of political and racial hatred, and the media, they're all trying to cover it up. Joining me now, Dinesh D'Souza, host of the Dinesh D'Souza podcast, and Victor Davis Hanson, of course, Hoover Institution Senior Fellow, author of The Dying Citizen. Dinesh, this cover-up, unreal.
Absolutely. You mentioned the different elements of the narrative, and each one of them is a kind of spear into the narrative of the left. This is why they tried to make it seem like the car did it. There wasn't a perpetrator. He wasn't a black perpetrator. As a film guy, I often look at motive. Motive is critical to understanding why something happened. Now, let's remember that in other cases, the Kyle Rittenhouse case, even the Derek Chauvin case, the left was very quick to jump to motive. These are white supremacists. The motive was based on race, and yet no racial motive turned up. In fact, racial motives weren't even really introduced in the Chauvin trial. But here, where there is a racial motive, where it seems obvious that this is a guy who was not fleeing from one scene and happened to run into a parade, but rather a guy who intentionally swerved from left to right, obviously to kill as many people as possible, driven by an apparent racial animus that's very evident in his own social media. Suddenly the media goes, oh, we can't salvage this narrative. So you realize here, this is a classic case of how the media operates like a house of mirrors, but it's not mirrors that illuminate reality. These are refracting mirrors that give you distorted pictures of reality. And basically, once the narrative doesn't really work anymore, they just turn out the lights and move on to something else.
Now, Victor, Jen Psaki was asked about Biden possibly visiting Waukesha. Watch.
Our hearts go out to this community, to the people in Waukesha, that we've been in touch, obviously, with officials there. Obviously, any president going to visit a community requires a lot of assets, requires taking their resources. It's not something that I have a trip previewed at this point in time.
Victor, too many assets? But he can jet to Europe to meet with global elites in Glasgow, no problem.
Yeah, from her description, you would have no idea what happened in Waukesha. She doesn't mention any violence. She doesn't mention the perpetrator. You can see that there really isn't a media, a mainstream media, if we can use that term, Lori. It's completely fused or absorbed by the progressive project. It's really jumped the shark in this. Nobody would really believe this was possible, turning white on white violence into racial pathology, or then ignoring black on white, largely white violence. But I hold BLM responsible, and you can see why in this Daily Kos, this left-wing poll that they commissioned, you can see why for the first time a plurality of Americans no longer support it, and really a majority of independent voters don't either, because they haven't said one word about this after being so vocal and outside the courthouse. In Kenosha, at Waukesha, they didn't say a word, except a local BLM affiliate guy said that, this was the start of a revolution. He was cheering it on. And of course, Darrell Brooks, as you pointed out, had some BLM affiliations. But this is at a time when we have the smash and grab violence. We have near record murders going on in Washington, Baltimore, Chicago, and we get utter silence. And meanwhile, the architects of BLM, have moved on to more lucrative things, especially real estate. So when you look at the media on one hand and BLM on the other, it's built on a complete fantasy. And I think people are sick of it, and the polls are starting to show, first with the media, and now I think BLM is catching up to them in their unpopularity.
Dinesh, do you agree that there's no constituency for that media? If you call, I think Victor's right, it's not even a media anymore. It's just an extension of the DNC or the far left, or it's not a media. So calling them media is kind of, it's not accurate. They don't have any credibility anymore.
I agree. There was something very illuminating that Joseph Goebbels once said. He said that propaganda cannot be judged by standards of truth or falsehood. It doesn't matter if it's true, and it doesn't matter if it's false. It only matters whether it works. In other words, the propaganda is measured by the result. And so I think this is the way the media looks at it. They see themselves as part of a propagandistic operation, and they judge their success by whether or not the lie works. I mean, look, more people were killed in Waukesha than were killed in Charlottesville, than were killed on January 6th combined. And yet, if you compare the acres, miles of media coverage of those two events, and then the kind of absolute alacrity with which they wanted to get rid of Waukesha just because it doesn't fit their narrative, this is a case where narratives are ultimately driving the facts and not the other way around.
Gentlemen, great to see both of you.